again, Mr. Burnham, for doing this. I know how much you value your time, so this means a lot. Before we go into all the success and all those amazing things, let's start with, what was your childhood like?
Well, I was raised by the man on that wall over there. His name was Edward Melcher Burnham. And by this woman over here.
Right next
over
door.
there. And her name was Ada Wells Burnham. She was my grandmother. And they were crusaders.
It's an interesting choice of words. What do you mean by
There wasn't a cause that they didn't embrace and pursue. So, for example, my grandparents were married long before women had the vote. So my grandmother was a suffragette, and she was firmly committed to women's rights. And so she thought that the Somerset Club was misguided in their exclusion of women. And so she didn't put up with that. And there was a women's dining room in the basement, now the grill room. And that was the women's dining room. And women were never, ever allowed upstairs under any conditions. And my grandmother had absolutely no truck with that. When it was lunchtime, she would take her friends and she would go to the Somerset Club and she would sit down in the main dining room and she would demand to be served. And woe be it to anyone who said no.
Wow. That's insane. It kind of sounds like to me, in a way, you inherited that from them, because I view you as a fearless man. So would you say those characteristics from them were
Sure.
You instilled that?
Well, they were wonderful. And grandfather taught me from the time I was a little boy. There are only two things that are important in life, David. And one is that you find a purpose that matters and that really means something to you in your work. And two, that you have a meaningful long-term relationship. He says, okay, enough of that now. How about me?
Hey, buddy, that's insane. Did you always value education when you were younger? Like, what did education mean to you?
Well, my grandparents were very educated people, but they were also deeply religious. And so a Sunday lunch was an exercise in critical thinking. So every Sunday my grandparents would gather their 10 grandchildren. I was the only one of the 10 that lived with them. The others lived with their parents. And we would go to Trinity Church in Copley Square, all of us, every Sunday. And so this is starting when I was maybe 5 years old. And my grandfather would go around the table and he would say to each grandchild, so summarize what you heard in the sermon today and what you think the lesson was and what your reactions were. And he treated each one of his grandchildren with great respect. So he wouldn't say what a silly lesson. He would be very irritated if they didn't remember the sermon. At which point, because he would make a point of getting the sermon, he would then read the whole thing to the grandchild who had forgotten it. So, and then after you'd say what your reactions were, he would then call on another grandchild and say, so, what did you just hear Bobby say? And what was your reaction to that? What do you think? And so he held very adult discussions with his grandchildren who, see, when I was 5, the oldest grandchild was 17. So, and the youngest was not there yet. There were 3 younger that weren't there until I was 8. After you'd have this discussion, which went on for over an hour, then he would then read Philip's Book. Have you ever seen the statue of the man outside Trinity Church?
I don't think I have.
Well, Jesus is standing behind him, and he's right next to Trinity Church, and his name was Philip Brooks, and he was my grandmother's great-great-uncle, and he was the orator of the day. He was very famous. And so after you'd had the discussion and he was the rector of Trinity Church and the bishop of Massachusetts and the president of Harvard. And so he would then read us the same, for that Sunday, one of Philip Brooks' sermons from that Sunday. And then he would say, what have you heard? And he'd randomly call on somebody and they say, what do you think of that? Is that what you heard? And then he'd call on somebody else. So what was the same and what was different in your great-great-uncle's sermon from the one you heard today? And so after about 2 hours of discussion, then he'd say, all right, it's so-and-so's turn to say grace, and then we'd have lunch.
After 2 hours.
2 hours, every Sunday.
That's insane. It sounds to me like he was a very, very disciplined man. You know, did you...
Well, he was very fair.
Very fair.
And he treated everyone with great respect. Unlike my grandmother, who only treated with respect people who agreed with her. But my grandfather believed in civil discourse, and you had to listen to people, and it's up to God to judge, not up to you.
Wow, that's
And
deep.
your grandmother judges, and let's hope that Christ enables her to grow up.
And he also sounded like he had a sense of humor, I would say.
He was very funny.
So, let's fast forward to college. What was your time at Harvard like? And by then, as your grandfather had said, did you find your purpose? Or were you still figuring things out?
No, I already had a purpose.
Oh, really? Well, then let's go back to that. At what age did you discover your purpose?
Pretty early on.
Wow.
My purpose was to want to help other people find a purpose.
Whoa. That's powerful.
Because that's what my grandfather did. And I admired it so much that I wanted to be like him.
Wow. And
Morale.
how did you put that together with university? Like,
Well, I was very fortunate because so much happens by chance in life, Rico.
chance, really?
I think so.
Do you think
Where
you
you-
need chance more in life than you need skills?
Well, I think be in the right place at the right time. And you can put yourself there, but much happens, I think, because, I'm a Christian, so I think I don't have any control over events. I think Christ decides.
Amen to that.
So, at the moment, I have a very serious condition. And if I don't have surgery, I will strangle to death in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So I have to have surgery. And the surgeon told me that there was a 40% chance that I would survive the surgery. So if I don't have the surgery, I'm going to die. And if I do have the surgery, according to him, there's a 60% chance I'm going to die. But, and I'm not even slightly upset about it. Firstly, I'm really old. And secondly, I can't control that. And neither can he. Christ can. And so Christ will decide. And whatever the right outcome is. And I'm fine with that. I'm perfectly fine. And absolutely at ease. And most of my life I've been at ease because that's what I think.
Wow.
I don't try and fix things because it's not my job to fix them. It's my job to help people find a purpose in their lives and to value them. But it's not my job. I'm a psychologist, but it's not my job to fix them.
That was beautiful, especially because I feel like I tried to fix things, like if I'm being honest, but after like speaking with you now, I think you've just given me a different perspective on that. And it's like, I'm Christian as well, so I feel like I should be letting God do his work and accepting that I'm only
you don't need to get in the way.
Yeah. So let's talk about being a psychologist. How did you know that that's what you wanted to be?
I did know that. I didn't. That was serendipitous. And when I was in high school, I made a movie. It was a very boring movie. It was, over time you watch the apple tree bloom, and then an apple got made, and then the apple fell from the tree and the apple rotted. So on the ground. So it was, a metaphor. And my art teacher was a wonderful artist whose name was Mary McClelland. And her husband was the chairman of the psychology department at Harvard. And they lived on Washington Street in Cambridge in an ashram. And which means that they lived it was their house, but it was a group home. And many people lived there. And they were quite splendid people. And their habit was every night they would invite someone to dinner, and that person would sit on David McClelland, Mary's husband's right. Mary invited me to, I think I was 15, and Mary invited me to come and show the movie and have dinner. And so I showed the movie, and I really interviewed David McClelland as opposed to him interviewing me.
Whoa.
So how did you get into psychology and what do you do? And so and I was just fascinated. And he said, well, would you like to come to Harvard with me tomorrow to class? And you can spend the day. I'm teaching 3 classes tomorrow, and you can, get a taste of it. I said, sure. And so instead of going to school, I went to Harvard with McClelland. And I never went back to school. Never. I just kept going to Harvard.
Are you serious?
And every day with David McClelland. So I never got really formally admitted to Harvard. I just eventually he enrolled me in classes, and I started getting grades, and then somebody wanted me to pay tuition, and so I applied for financial aid because my grandparents were dead, and I had very wealthy parents, but I did not know them. So they weren't about to pay for some stranger. And so I just said they were dead. And so I got a full scholarship because I didn't, I had no income and no parents, no one to support me. And so it was just serendipity.
Yeah. Wow.
And he and Mary had 5 children, and they're all good friends of mine, but none of them were interested in what David did, and they all did other things, and he had many wonderful qualities, but it disappointed him greatly that they weren't interested in what he did. So he literally, he paid no attention to them, and I became more or less his son. Well, probably more than less. And so we started a business together, but after McClelland died, then I had a business partner whose name was Rosen, and who died of ALS. Yeah, very sad. So, but McClelland and I were in business together until he died. He was the chairman and I was the CEO. And he taught me to be a really good researcher, an excellent researcher. He taught me to really care about telling the truth. And I taught him you couldn't fix things.
No. Because we go back to what you said, only God. That's
Yeah,
God's
he was
job.
great. And we had a wonderful relationship. Wonderful. And my wife adored him. And she worked with us. She worked with me. And I had a wonderful marriage. My grandparents had a wonderful, strong, loving marriage, and I wanted to have that. And my grandfather told me, and my grandmother told me, only 2 things are important: having a long-term relationship that matters, and having a purpose.
beautiful. Like, what advice would you give to the next generation?
Well, my children have purpose-driven lives, and they're wonderful people, and I'm surrounded by wonderful people. I have many friends, Rico, and I care about them a lot, and I'm almost never, I do a lot of things by myself, but I'm never lonely because I have the support of so many people that I care about and that care about me. And I do so many things with other people that are purpose-driven.
So, in summary, what would you say it takes to be successful? Like, what qualities
That's
does
the
someone
thing,
need
two
to
things
have?
I told you.
Wow, that's it. All right, well, that wraps up this interview.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Burnham.
of course, Rico.